river beneath the stars. There once was a village forgotten by the maps, cradled between hills, so quiet that even the wind whispered softer here. At the edge of this village was a river, not famous, not large, but old enough that the stones beneath its water had worn smooth from time, not tide. People called it the river beneath the stars. It wasn't its official name, but no one remembered what that was anymore. The nickname came from a custom. At night, the villagers would sit by the bank and watch the sky shimmer on the river's surface, as if the stars had fallen gently to rest in the current. One of the villagers was an older man named Elian. No one knew where he came from. He simply appeared one autumn, quiet as dusk, carrying only a satchel, a cane, and the look of someone who'd already lived many lives. He wasn't particularly known for anything. He didn't speak much. He didn't ask for anything. Every morning he walked to the bakery, bought the same loaf, nodded thanks, and walked down to the river to sit beneath the tall willow that leaned over the water. He stayed there for hours. Some thought him odd. Some thought him lonely. The children, curious but too shy to ask him questions, made up stories about him, that he had once sailed the stars, that he could speak to fish, that he was waiting for someone long lost to return through the river's current. The truth, as truths often are, was much simpler and far more tender. Elian was a man who had spent too much of his life in places that demanded too much of him. He had worked. He had lost. He had carried burdens that left lines around his eyes and silences between his words. But now, he was tired of noise. He wanted only to remember how to feel the passing of time without fearing it. So he came to the river, and every day it reminded him how to be still. Across the village lived Mira, a woman in her early 30s who ran the small tea house inherited from her grandmother. Mira was known for her gentle laugh and her quiet hands. She could pour tea like a poem and arrange a tray like a prayer. Yet something in her eyes always seemed distant, like her thoughts never quite made it back to the present. She was kind, deeply so, but few noticed how much she gave and how little she kept for herself. One evening, Mira walked to the river. Her grandmother had once told her, "When your mind runs too fast to sleep, go to where water doesn't need to be pushed to move." She had always loved that line. She found Elian sitting beneath the willow, and though she was surprised, she said nothing. He looked up, offered her a nod, then returned to the river. She sat a few feet away quietly. The stars shimmered across the current like scattered memories. They didn't speak for an hour. Then he said softly, "You serve the world tea, but does anyone serve you?" She blinked. Then, almost against her own will, she smiled. "I never ask." "Maybe," he said, "you should try." They didn't speak much more that night, but she came again the next and the next. They never agreed to meet, but slowly, as if by instinct, they shared the twilight hour at the river each evening. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they just sat. She told him about the tea house, how tired she was. He told her about his wife, long gone, and how the silence she left behind taught him to hear the world differently. He never used grand words. His stories were like stones in the water, solid, simple, gently shifting. They began to bring each other small gifts. She once brought him lemon bread. He once brought her a hand-carved spoon. One night he handed her a note folded into the shape of a crane. Inside he'd written, "Even in stillness, rivers move." She kept that note tucked into her apron pocket for weeks. One winter, Elian fell ill. It was not sudden. He seemed to fade like the end of a candle. Slow, then, all at once, Mira visited him daily. She brought him tea, read to him from old books, told him the village gossip even though he hardly reacted. On his final day, she asked, "Were you happy here?" He gave a faint smile. "I was peaceful. That's more rare." She held his hand until he passed. The village held a small, quiet ceremony. There was no family to contact, but no one thought of him as a stranger. People spoke kindly. A few even cried. Mira scattered his ashes in the river. For weeks after, she still walked to the willow tree. The silence now felt different, deeper, but it didn't hurt as much as she expected. One evening, she brought a notebook with her, and she began to write. Years passed. Mira grew older. The tea house stayed open. People came not just for tea, but for her stories. She had begun to collect them. Stories of people who came through the village and the gentle things they left behind. She told them like Elian once spoke. Simple, soft, never rushed. When she herself became old and her hands were no longer steady, she asked a young girl who often visited the tea house to carry her to the willow tree one last time. There, beside the river, she handed the girl her journal and whispered, "Tell stories like you're pouring tea." Mira died that night, listening to the water. Now, long after they've gone, the river beneath the stars still flows. The willow still leans. And sometimes, if you sit quietly by the bank, you might hear a whisper, not of ghosts, but of grace. The story of Elian and Mira is not grand. It is not loud, but it is true. Its lesson is this: you do not need to be extraordinary to matter. You only need to be present. Kindness offered quietly can outlive even the stars.